John Mohammed, I'd like to thank you. Dira Mirabani kana. Zaka چې زوم پښتون یم او تاسو لکه څنګه چې دا خبرې وکړې کنه نو زه به نیم پښتو کې وم نیم به انګریزي کې کنه لکه one of the greatest messages and education that I learned from your talk is what goes on in madrasas, because as you said, you know, we living in the West, we tend to be bombarded with images and messages, negative messages about what goes on in madrasa. But you know, you talking about your personal experiences about the great madrasa in India, Deoband, I think that in itself is very enlightening and certainly, you know, a matter of thought-provoking for those of us who are learning from Sky News or, you know, what we see in the media. What I'd like to ask is, how come the madrasas in India are so successful, whereas in Pakistan, they're going downhill?
The reason is simple, because, you know, in India, not only has there been no politicization of the madrasas, but there's been a conscious effort for the madrasas not to become politicized. Whereas in Pakistan, there's been a conscious effort to politicize madrasas. I'll give you an example. You know, I didn't mention that I went to Darul Uloom Karachi when I was starting to set up in 2009. I was starting to set up this Islamic Vocational Academy, and I wanted, actually, we were going to have a meeting of Islamic scholars in Jalalabad, and I wanted, I won't mention his name, the main founder of Darul Uloom Karachi, the leading light of Darul Uloom Karachi, who is a great Islamic economist, also, as well as being a great scholar, to come to our meeting. To tell you the truth, you know, I mean, he hardly talked to me. He hardly talked to me. You know, and the fact that I was English, the fact that I was coming from Afghanistan, you know, he just didn't want to talk to me, you know, because, you know, the fact that I was Muslim, the fact that I was a graduate from Darul Uloom Deoband didn't mean anything. You know, he just didn't want to talk to me. Last year I went to Darul Uloom Deoband. I go to Darul Uloom Deoband all the time. There's no question that, you know, my old teachers would, you know, embrace me, and, you know, there's no question that they would, because that distrust hasn't come in, you know, into the society. Because, you know, I'm just John Muhammad, who used to be their student. So this is, you know, there's been a conscious effort to politicize madrasas in Pakistan in order to mobilize this great, you know, body of manpower, basically, to mobilize it in order to, you know, fight proxy wars. And so this has led to politicization, and it's also led to radicalization. And this is my impression. If anybody has any different impression, there, and it's from living in that, you know, that I have that impression. But anyone has any different, you know, they're very welcome to mention it. I might be wrong. When you go into Darul Uloom Deoband, you know, the only thing they're doing here is learning about the Book of God, about the Hadith of the Holy Prophet, about the fiqh of Islam, and they're learning to become Islamic scholars. That's all they're doing. You know that. Whereas when you go into, you know, as in the case here that I say, there's politicization and radicalization has happened in Pakistan madrasas. Thank you.
You didn't cover upon how you became a Muslim. What drove you to Islam? Was it the Pakhtun society, or was it you saw something within the Pakhtun people, or was it something different? I'm quite interested to know that.
It was generosity of the Pashtun people, actually. You know, at that time I was completely broke, to tell you the truth. And so there was one person who I was traveling through Khyber, and he was sitting next to me in the bus, and he became my friend. And he said to, then in those days, these tribal levies used to come onto the bus, and any foreigner who was on the bus, they used to take 2 rupees off them, mahsul. You know, they used to take 2 rupee tribal levy, tribal duty, you know, whatever. So when they came to me, he said, yeah, you're also a foreigner, give me 2 rupees. And this Afridi who was with me, he fought with this Khasadat. He said, you know, this is my guest, and I'm not going to allow you to take 2 rupees off him. So this, you know, it was his type of, you know, generosity I really liked. And, you know, actually it was his, may Allah bless him, where, you know, wherever he is. And it was also his love for his country. He was coming from Karachi. In those days, there was no Dobe Mobe Pakino. You know, there was only Karachi they used to go to. So he was coming from Karachi, but maybe he was coming after 6 months, maybe he was coming after 1 year. He was working in Karachi. And he was just like to go through Khyber, and just to arrive in his own country, he was like crying, you know, he was so emotional. He was, oh, you know, this is my country, you know, my watan. So that also gave me, you know, that experience, I remember it a lot. Then one experience was a shopkeeper, actually. He was in Pandar. He was you know, in Pandar, which is in the Gilgit Valley. And I slept, he gave me a bed for the night and bedding and everything, and I thought, since he's a shopkeeper, I should pay him. So I offered him 2 rupees, and that was a, you know, a normal amount for just a bed for the night in those days. It was a normal amount. So he said, you know, how am I going to take money off you? You know, you're just a guest, you know. I said, yeah, but you're a shopkeeper, you know, so you should take money. He said, no. Because that was, you know, his generosity. And, you know, he just, you know, not as if he was doing me a favor or anything, but, you know, this, you know, was like an affront to his, you know, honor, that even I could think that, yeah, you know, that he could think of taking money off me. Another thing which was actually very, you know, just the actual instance was I'd actually not been fasting. I was thinking about becoming Islam. Abdul Hadi had become Muslim. Various people had become Muslim in Kalam and in Madian. But I was thinking about it, you know. I wasn't a Muslim yet, so I hadn't been fasting for the first 3 or 4 days of Ramadan. But I'd sort of been half fasting, you know. So, I mean, I'd been having a late morning meal and this and that, and I hadn't been fully fasting. So I got to, it was Charbagh. I got to Charbagh, and I was coming from Kalam to Peshawar. And it was about the 3rd day of Ramadan. And it was, so this, you know, I just stayed sitting in the bus, actually, because everybody else went off to break their fast, and I stayed sitting in the bus. And somebody just came to me and gave me some pakora or zama kajure zama palaske wachuolegana. So, you know, they just gave, you know, like, you know, they weren't saying he's a foreigner or, you know, he's not fasting or anything like that. They just gave me to break the fast without saying anything. Some dates and some pakoras to break the fast. So this was another thing. From a theological point of view, I'll just give you from which I mentioned in my sermon in Cambridge yesterday. You know, I grew up as a Catholic. And so the Catholic, they had this, that muns pa latini jabaki. So they had, the liturgy was in Latin. Then in 1960s, they had this Second Vatican Council in the 1960s in the Catholic Church. And they changed it. They changed it from Latin to English. They said you can... So for me, this was like a big thing, you know. I got used to the prayer. This was their thing, you know, modernizing the church. So I thought, you know, this, you know, it should be in Latin, you know. I mean, you can imagine, you know, if someone starts, it's not going to happen, but you know, someone starts saying muns in English, you know, it's going to be a big thing, isn't it? But I mean, that would be a much bigger thing because it's not possible in Islam for anybody to do that. But still, it was a big shock. And I sort of started looking into this thing, you know, how did this Pope get the authority to change the liturgy? And then, you know, the infallibility of the Pope. So I did actually think a lot about theological matters as well. And there are quite a few theological matters also, but that would be a long story actually to go into the theological matters. But also then when I came to Islam, it's very clear. اتخذوا أحبارهم ورهبانهم أربابا من دون الله والمسيح ابن مريم وما أمروا إلا ليعبدوا إلها واحدا. So you know that you know there's only, and then the Adi ibn Hatim came to the Holy Prophet and said, how come how come you're saying that you're worshipping your priests and your monks? We don't worship them. And then he said, the Holy Prophet ﷺ said that, do you consider to be allowed something which Allah has prohibited but they say is allowed? They said, yes, we do. And then they said, do you consider to be lawful something which Allah has prohibited but they allow? And they said, yes, we do. And then he said, ذَلِكَ عِبَادَتُهُمْ. This is the worship of them. This is tantamount to worship of them. So in Islam, infallibility of the Pope is in fact setting him up on a par with Almighty Allah. So from a theological point of view also, there was a process. But I went into just the Pukhtunwali side of it, that they, just the generosity and the big-heartedness of the Pashtuns, yeah.
Assalamu alaikum, John. What was or is your experience of working with or knowing other ethnic and tribal groups in Afghanistan and their reaction towards you as an English Pakhtun?
I think the masses accept you as an English Pashtun completely. I think the more westernized someone is, the less likely they are to appreciate that a Westerner can come to, can become a Pashtun and become a Muslim. That's my impression. There's just the masses accept you completely, quickly. But educated, westernized elements in society, they're leaning in the other direction, towards westernization. So they can't really appreciate how a Westerner can become. This is just my impression, very generalized, but that's my impression. I've always, I think, had more affinity with the sort of people in the street, as they say, rather than the elite sections of society.
I just want to know, what sort of upbringing did you have in terms of class before you went to travel? What sort of background did you come from?
No, I'm from a public school. I'm from quite a sort of middle-class background, So I'm from a public school, and I was educated by Jesuits. I was actually born in the West Indies, so my grandfather was, my grandparents were quite early settlers in the West Indies during the days of colonialism. So when I came to school, then when I came to England to go to school, then I came to England. But I was from, I wasn't, I suppose you'd say privileged, but not particularly, but I was from quite a, comfortable family background, you could say, yeah.
What's your impression of modern day Muslims or young Asians? I'm not from Peshawar, or I'm not Pashto, I'm Pakistani, but what's your impression, seeing as you have quite a colourful background, that you came from a middle class family in England, you lived in that part of the region.
Yeah.
What's your impression of our generation?
I really don't know very much about British society. I come here, and when I'm here, I'm in Cambridge, and I'm with Muslims in Cambridge who are pretty international, because graduate students in Cambridge are quite from Malaysia, from South Africa, from the Middle East, from various parts of the world. And I'm impressed, to tell you the truth, we're there, because I'm just impressed by how open-minded they are and how we can discuss things, very openly and very easily. What were we discussing? Yeah, we were discussing the other day about the Arab Spring, and in the light of verses of the Quran, Ya ayyuhallazina amanu ati'u Allaha wa ati'u Rasul wa ulil amri minakum. So verses like that, and multiple ahadiths which actually encourage us to actually to not rebel against authority, basically. So we were discussing that really openly, and giving every single point of view about whether you can rebel against authority, and what are the sort of conditions in which you can rise up against authority, against the government. And this is, a tricky question, actually.
What you were saying, that students in madrasas have a kind of more of a submissive approach to authority and are less likely to question, whereas our generation, although we have the traditional values respecting elders, being in a Western society forces you to question and analyse. You can't take things passively. That's not encouraged in a Western society. So battling those two elements and trying to take a middle path, which is being accepting, yet at the same time being critical, it's quite difficult. And I don't know if you've observed that in our generation, this dichotomy.
I've absolutely observed it, and I think you're absolutely right. You put it very well as well, because this is exactly what I've observed, is that they are, trying to, as I actually stressed in my sermon yesterday in Cambridge, was really on this subject, because Islam is ad-din al-mahfuz. It has to be preserved in its authentic state, but at the same time it has to be modernized. So how much can you modernize it in order to maintain its authenticity, but also make it very relevant and very consistent with the needs of the actual age in which we live? And this is a huge challenge. But this is a challenge which actually your generation of British Muslims has taken up, actually, because that's my impression from what you say, and that's my impression from the students that I meet in Cambridge, who are not reflective of the society as a whole, I know, but still they are an important section of the society, of the society that they come from. So I certainly believe that they are absolutely right. And the fact that we could talk so openly, obviously amongst my students, I'm a sort of more of a conservative type of, and actually I have bad experiences of politicization of Islam. So to tell you the truth, I veer towards the sort of, that authority should be respected. And even if you're, even if they are zalim, but Islam teaches you to unsur akhaka zaliman aw mazluman. You should help your brother, whether they are zalim or mazlum. And then the people said to the Holy Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, how can we help our brother if he's zalim, if he's oppressing us? And the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, you can help him by stopping him from oppressing people. So stopping the ruler from oppressing people doesn't mean you topple him. It means you do something which, you think about how we can do something which is going to be effective to make him see the light, but your aim should not be to topple him. And to me, the aim of these insurgencies, this might not go down well with you, and it didn't go down well with my students, but they respected, obviously, my point of view, and they gave their own point of view. The aim should not be. The aim seems to be in these insurrections to topple the government, and the aim should be to rectify and to reform the government, but not to topple it from an Islamic. But you can talk about things like that in a very open way in this society, and in a very open way, and in a very tolerant way that people see, and in a very helpful way. So you can't do that. You're right. It's difficult in societies, more closed societies. That in East, and this is something for me is very refreshing to be here always, to be able to have that kind of debate, open debate about what's the right course of action, which is consonant with the needs of the day, but also consistent with Islamic teachings.
For us living in the Western society, there are a tiny minority of Muslims who, how shall I put it, express their feelings in a very provocative way, which, whether they realize it or not, affect and tarnish the majority of the peace-loving Muslims. What is your, advice, especially to youngsters, like the sister there, who tend to be quite emotional at times, and they choose. No, I'm just saying at her age, because I'm a teacher by profession, and I'm talking from experience. That they express their feelings, in a very uncontrolled way. In fact, having very little Islamic knowledge, you know. I mean, for example, most of the parents who have come from Pakistan, their Islamic knowledge is the qaida, you know, the alif, ba, ta, sa, nothing, you know, to do with the mu'amilat, you know, the everyday dealing. So they are getting mixed messages, you know, like the young lady said there. Because from the home background, there is no concrete Islamic knowledge. So there is no real guidance. But, you know, Allah has chosen you to do this job, you know, and as a Pashtun and also as a Pakistani background, you know, we should take more responsibility about educating our youngsters and, you know, taking care of our communities. But Allah has chosen you as, you know, I don't know, I can't remember whether it's a hadith or it's in the Quran, that if Allah says that if we do not do what we are supposed to do, Allah will replace us with those who are much God-fearing than us. And I think you are a classic example of that. And may Allah reward you for that.
Thank you for saying so. There's lots of other. I mean, that's true. I think you know, that's a hadith that I mean, that's a saying of in the Quran. Actually, it's an ayah of the Quran, and that's true. That Allah does change the focal point of Islam as many times through history. And it was in this same final sermon of the Holy Prophet that when he said, يُبَلِّغُ الْحَاضِرُ الْغَائِبُ, you know, that the people who are present should pass on my message to the people who are absent. And many of those who are absent will be more capable of bearing and of acting in accordance with this message than you people who are. And then that happened, you know, that when the Arabs went to Central Asia, for instance, and they are the ones who then served Islam for for a long time, and then the focal point, it became more South Asia. You're right. To get back to your original question, I think that the thing is, you alluded to it also, is that, you know, this Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahi anil Munkar. You know, because, you know, people speaking out of turn. This is what leads to it, you know. There's three types of, you know, sort of encouraging people to do good and discouraging people from doing the wrong. One is to do it by force. One is to do it by word of mouth, and one is to do it by qalb, in your heart. So what we always used to learn was, you know, to do it by force, that's the task of the government. That's not the task of any vigilante group, any type of group, you know. So, you know, if to enforce the law, basically, is the job of the government. To do it by word of mouth is the job of Islamic scholars. So they're entitled to do that. And to do it in your heart, that you don't like this, but you can't do anything about it, that's the job of the masses. So I think you have to leave, you know, one has to leave the people who are in a position to do something or to say something to those people, rather than people sort of speaking out of turn, you know, and not saying something which they're not entitled, you know, talking about something which they don't have the requisite knowledge and background to really talk about. I think that's my impression. You know, I think that happens everywhere, and I think that's something that's quite common nowadays. It's sort of people thinking they know everything, but in fact not. And I think this is sort of, you know, the internet and the sort of, you know, that knowledge has become very widely available nowadays. So it's very easy for someone to be able to think, oh, I'm in a position to be able to talk with authority on this and that, whereas in fact they're not.